As the gentle murmur of conversations fades into a nervous silence, I find myself standing in the library of the Carter estate, encircled by my family. Sunlight glints off the polished wood. Everybody is staring at me today. An expression of cautious perplexion crosses my Uncle Charles's face as he puts down his drink. Brandon, my cousin, puts down his phone. A hint of intrigue flits over Lauren's face as she leans forward ever so slightly. I have a big folder full of legal paperwork, but no one has figured out why. What I'm about to reveal is completely unknown. I calm myself by taking deep breaths and speaking slowly. The sale of the estate can't proceed unless I tell you anything. Charles gives a courteous but condescending arched eyebrow. Could this wait, Sam? We have a plan. Yeah, I'm not a fan. I am very excited. Simply said, I am the owner of the building where some of you reside, and you do not. Quietness spreads like a wave across the room. Brandon scowls, his laughter muted. What on earth are you referring to? Laying the folder flat on the table, I opened it to find notarized and stamped deeds and corporation information. For a long time, you all thought I was having trouble. I was the quiet one, who was always the odd one out. You put my value in relation to the automobile I drive, or the social events I don't attend. You probably thought I didn't grow up since I was too little to handle anything significant. I give each of them a quick look. However, as you preoccupied yourself with becoming famous, I went out and acquired assets that you would have never considered. Lauren raises her voice to say, seeming more perplexed than harsh. Hey Sam, what's going on here? I signal the papers with a nod. What matters is that I'm your landlord, not merely your cousin. I am the proud owner of 37% of Carter Realty as of this morning. As his jaw droops little, Charles fixes his gaze on me. I feel like the room is leaning in my direction, as if the walls were attempting to take in what I just said. For the first time in a long time, I am not the shy girl who sits in the corner. The cards are in my hands, and this is only the start. Hi, I'm Samantha Carter. I am known as Sam by everyone. At 33 years old, I've always been the one in my family that stays out of the spotlight. Neither am I showy. Just because it's Thursday doesn't mean I have to wear luxury clothing or go on a private island vacation. My life, on the other hand, is constructed to appear easy from the outside. I have a little apartment next to Fairmount Park, a beat-up blue Chevy Malibu, and on weekends I go hiking or read financial papers while sipping coffee. So they think I'm having trouble. However, that is due to the fact that they failed to delve farther. I came from a modest family. Beautiful places should feel like home, not trophies, according to my architect father. My mother worked as a kindergarten teacher and would put up money for months so that I could go to museums like the Franklin Institute. They were killed in a car crash on the way back from a brief holiday when I was 16 years old. The sky fell in on me. My grandma, Margaret Carter, stepped in at that point. Here at the Carter estate where she brought me to live, I can still hear the echo of long-gone discussions echoing through the halls and into chambers that have been unused for decades. Margaret was more than simply the family matriarch. Carter Realty, which she established, was a modest beginning for a real estate company that became a household name in Philadelphia boardrooms. Grandma Margaret, on the other hand, thought that money should remain out of sight, unlike other relatives. She showed me that authority isn't always flashy. Whoever speaks the least often ends up being the most powerful person there is. Additionally, she ensured that I was well-versed in all aspects of the firm, from analyzing financial accounts to identifying undervalued areas and securing assets through strategic legal frameworks. In the shadows, I was learning to create something substantial as my relatives learned to network over champagne. I had no intention of keeping secrets from my loved ones. It became more clear to me as I observed their constant pursuit of material possessions and ostentatious gifts that they would never comprehend the path I had chosen in life. At some point, the space between them became completely silent. Up to this point, my initial evening at the Carter estate is etched in my memory. At 16 years of age, with a carry-on bag in my hand, I stood beneath the soaring entryway ceilings, enveloped by the aroma of antique flowers and polished wood. The first welcoming face I encountered was Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, the housekeeper who had been employed by the Carters from the time I was born. As she escorted me upstairs to a bedroom larger than my entire former apartment, she murmured that everything would be all right, hugged me softly, and said goodbye. On that particular night, though, not even the most elegant satin draperies and antique furnishings could put me at ease. This wasn't my reality, I knew that. Coupons, not trust money, were my family's saving mechanism. Coming from parents who stressed the need of conserving money rather than leveraging assets, My family was having supper downstairs and I could hear their voices. For fear of falling into their trap, I lingered at the foot of the steps, peering over the railing. Grandma Margaret eventually summoned me. Perched atop the lengthy mahogany dining table, she sat in an understated black suit, a pearl necklace glistening against her neck. She spoke with an air of tranquility. "Please, Sam, have a seat. You are relatives. In other words, you're welcome here." With that, I proceeded. However, it seemed like a different tongue was being spoken at that table. Talking about ski vacations, new phones, and summer jobs at corporations I'd only heard of on TV, my cousins Brandon and Lauren were already falling into the rhythms of the rich. Lauren brought up the idea of establishing a personal brand at the tender age of 17. Just in the driveway was a brand new automobile adorned with a gigantic red bow, and Brandon had recently obtained his driver's license. I was holding on to the ancient automobile keys that belonged to my dad. Initially, they were not aggressive. Not at all. Questions posed by Brandon had an air of inacuity, but were actually rather pointed. "Have you ever flown first class, Sam?" Lauren would make squinting noises and mutter things like, "I love that sweatshirt. Yes, it's vintage." Her tone was kind, but I could see she was trying to convey the idea that it appeared cheap. I made an effort to ignore it. Small moments nevertheless continued to accumulate. For example, when Grandma Margaret asked me to assist her in her studies with reviewing property portfolios, I gladly accepted. Sitting next to her, I listened as she spoke about cap rates, cash flows, and communities that were going to undergo a rebirth. A hidden realm seemed to be revealing itself. My relatives were outside her study doors, rolling their eyes, as Brandon whispered to Lauren, "Looks like Sam's going to be the family accountant." "Or the librarian," Lauren scoffed. Unbeknownst to me, it hurt. I was held close by Margaret, though. On weekends, she'd walk me about town, showing me properties that Carter Realty had purchased a long time ago. Subtle changes like new shops opening or roadways being repaved would be her cues to signal change. She would softly murmur, "Honor doesn't necessarily wear a badge. Learning to recognize it requires eye training." I was able to decipher zoning maps more accurately than the majority of real estate salespeople by the time I was 19 years old. However, that did nothing to facilitate family get-togethers. Gatherings were held over the Christmas season, complete with orchestras performing by the majestic staircase and chefs flown in from New York. And every year someone would inquire as to whether I had met a nice boy who might assist me in affording a more comfortable living. When I was in my early 20s, the chasm that separated my cousins and me was wider than a canyon. At Carter Realty, Brandon wore pricey suits and tossed about terms like synergy in his job. Glamour shots and endorsement deals from high-end brands abound on Lauren's newly launched lifestyle site. I was saving every penny I could afford while living in a studio apartment and working entry-level jobs. My family had no idea that I was studying during those late hours and thrift store finds, doing the math on undeveloped areas that nobody cares about just yet. Purchasing minor properties through limited liability companies, LLCs whose names no one would ever associate with me. Reason being, I learned the game from Grandma Margaret. I began keeping score with deeds and stock shares, while my cousins maintained track with automobiles and purses. Alone, it felt. It may be excruciating at times. The voice of Margaret, nevertheless, never left my thoughts. People will recognize you for your true self, Sam, and that day will come. But in the meantime, let people assume the worst of you. You will never have an edge like this. I was quietly creating something in the dining room that no one would ever guess. The leaves in Philadelphia began to change color from green to crimson and gold by the time the yearly Carter Family Conference came around again. I could feel the burden of long-forgotten memories weighing me down as I ascended the stone staircase of the Carter estate. A flurry of activity filled the stately entryway on the inside. As they slid past caterers stacked silver platters with delectable appetizers. Within earshot, a gentle piano tune swelled. There was a distinct undercurrent of tension, too, the same strain that had been building for years, lurking under the courteous laughs. Standing by the hearth, Charles shook hands and laughed somewhat too loudly. Even though he slicked back his graying hair and wore an impeccable tailored suit, a little furrow between his eyebrows revealed the tension he was trying to conceal. He grinned briefly upon seeing me. "Salutations, Samantha." "Greetings," he remarked. "Has your home in Fairmount Park been your sanctuary?" The tone was kind, but the sharpness was obvious. With a nod, I concurred. "It's familiar." Wearing a blue suit that was likely more expensive than my automobile, Brandon drew forward with a whiskey glass in his grasp. His smile widening, he invited Sam to come view his new abode. I am now known by name by the concierge. You'd adore it. Endless windows, vistas of the city. Not a single floorboard makes a sound. Lauren came over to join us, her hair styled in a sophisticated knot and wearing a champagne-colored silk top. She regarded my understated blue outfit, then grinned, not in an unpleasant way, but deliberately remote, saying, "I'm sure your place has charm," she said. My heart ached, but I paid it no mind. The library's seating was organized in tidy rows, each one facing a screen. Charles instituted a strict curfew. After speaking, he coughed. "Thank you for being here, family. Real estate has been experiencing rapid changes, as you are well aware. With your help, Carter Realty has grown into a leading real estate agency in Philadelphia. Nevertheless, we must move forward." With a single touch of the remote, the screen behind him sprang to life, revealing a breathtaking overhead view of the Carter estate, encircled by a blaze of fall foliage. Silence descended upon the chamber. Charles made a motion toward the picture. "The 5 acres of land here are among the most prime in the city. I have been receiving messages from developers for months. They're presenting numbers that, to be honest, I didn't expect to see." The room was filled with whispers. With a radiant expression, Lauren leaned forward. "What is the range of our conversation?" Charles beamed. "We're talking about $55 million in serious interest." Brandon whistled softly. "I can't believe it. Do you have any idea what we could do with that amount of money?" A nod from Charles indicated his agreement. "Exactly. Streamline our whole portfolio if we wanted to. Contribute to fresh business endeavors. We need to increase our brand's visibility outside of the capital. On my way to Boston." He held his breath, allowing the suspense to develop. "However, selling the estate would be necessary to make this a reality. Destroy it. In its stead, construct luxury condominiums." The air was heavy with stillness. The arms of Lauren were folded. "We should definitely take it. The home is stunning, yet it's a bit ancient." "We could split the bill," Brandon said, joining in. "Be diversified. I know people who are seeking new investment opportunities. What if this helps us all out?" Charles gestured with a warning gesture. "Certainly we would put it to a vote. Every family must reach a unanimous conclusion. Voting rights are directly related to stated assets, as you are all aware." An icy knot knotted in my gut. Nearly 40% of the votes were cast for Charles. When Brandon and Lauren were together, they had 30 more. My little reported investment was less than 2%. Charles cast an almost maternal look in my direction. "I know this location holds sentimental meaning for you, Samantha. Consider instead the wishes of your parents. Security, a chance. That's what Margaret insisted on teaching us, wasn't she?" A knot formed in my jaw. "Some things are worth saving according to Grandma Margaret as well. The house is an integral element of our identity." Charles seemed to be thinking about it as he nodded, but he kept his distance. Lauren drew nearer. "We also adore this location, Sam. Property taxes aren't paid by sentimentality, though. Beyond this, though, isn't there anything else you desire?" She made an oblique motion at my clothing and my life. "You might as well upgrade that car of yours," Brandon chimed in. Polite but hurtful laughter echoed across the room. Still, Charles persisted. "The stats will speak for themselves, you know. We will conduct a preliminary vote after lunch. It goes without saying that signatures are necessary for any final agreement." After a little pause, he said, "Samantha, I would hate to see you abandoned." No one could hear the words. A yell couldn't have hurt me more than those words, for the simple reason that they had always assumed it to be true of me, the girl who would be abandoned. Brandon gave me a little tap on the shoulder as we all stood to take a lunch break. "No need to worry, Sam. That lovely studio remains yours, doesn't it? And there's still plenty of time to meet a supportive spouse." Chest contorted, I gritted my teeth and smiled. The thing they failed to realize was that I was not going to be the one abandoned, with the intention of proving it the next time we met here. Under a chandelier that shimmered like a waterfall of ice, lunch was served in the formal dining room of the Carter estate. Filet mignon, haricots verts, and little roasted potatoes, presented like works of art, appeared on plates in eerily silent arrival. However, I hardly got a taste of it. Why? Because I had already planned what to eat after dessert. Charles dutifully tapped his knife against his glass when the coffee was poured. His voice was as silky as the twisted silk tie around his neck as he declared, "Family, it's time we talk numbers." We re-entered the library in a unified front. After Charles resumed his position at the front, the room settled into a serene silence. He motioned for the lights to go down, and then behind him on the screen he pressed a slide that showed a chart of the family's assets, individual ownership, and voting shares. "Samantha, would you like to begin?" he said, casting a sidelong glance in my direction as his smile fell short of his eyes. My throat was parched. Slowly I rose to my feet. "I have kept up with my consulting work this year," I announced, "and I made sure my investments grew steadily." Brandon emitted a little snort of amusement. "Money transfers. Hey Sam, hurry up. Is this going to be a Roth IRA and some municipal bonds or actual investments?" The room resounded with a low-volume chuckle. Lauren leaned back in her chair and put her chin on her palm. "I don't mean to be rude, but this is very important, Sam. People here are playing with tens of millions. Family business cannot be managed in a charitable manner." I could feel my heart racing. "I'm not requesting financial assistance," I said, my voice becoming more serious. "Value is more than simply looking at the numbers," I explained. Charles reeked of throat clearing. "Sam, it is very commendable. However, your investment is rather small. Remembering the good old days won't stop us from taking advantage of this deal." Brandon beamed with a mischievous, vicious grin. "Exactly. This is serious cash, folks, except for the spare coins Sam has stashed beneath her bed." When Lauren tried to intervene to ease the tension, she ended up making things worse. "I mean, it's not like we don't notice or value your thriftiness, Sam. However, the fate of the Carter surname is at stake here." Hardly did I swallow. "And just what is the meaning of the Carter name?" I fired back. "Destroying our ancestral home in order to construct condominiums for those who couldn't care less about our past." Brandon furrowed his brow. "Records don't cover real estate taxes. That ought to be obvious to you. You have lived frugally your entire life, right?" Lauren looked at me with compassion. "Look, Sam, it's not about you. Unfortunately, everything here is crumbling. Something more fitting for our current selves may stand in its stead." Nods caught my eye as I looked around the room. With a voice as sugary as syrup, Aunt Valerie interjected, "My darling, it's quite okay to be aware of your limitations. Not everyone has to have a big vision." I felt a sudden dull ache in my chest. They had observed me as the reserved one for all those years, the kind one, a girl who felt out of place. Charles raised an index finger. "I don't want to overstate this. A preliminary vote will be called. Is anyone on board with moving forward with the development offer?" Almost instantly, everyone stood up, Uncle Richard, Aunt Valerie, Brandon, and Lauren. Slowly but surely, nearly everyone in the room showed their approval. Charles brought his hand down. "I think we've reached a consensus. Samantha, I'm hoping you'll show some mercy." Brandon interrupted me just as I was about to speak. "Sam, you're renting an apartment. Half of the folks here drive cars that are older than yours. What are your thoughts on a deal for $55 million? A fleeting expression, perhaps regret, crossed Charles's face, maybe even computation. "I know this area is special to you, Samantha," he whispered, "but company matters. Sentimentality is not an option, especially coming from someone who hasn't made as much of an impact as the rest of us." My nails began to dig into my palms from the tight grip I had on my hands. "What I have done counts. I have been working, it's just that I haven't made it obvious." Brandon emitted a barking sound of amusement. "Questioning. What are you working on? Your consulting gigs as a hobby, or that strategy for your hypothetical $1 million nest egg?" My cheeks turned red. "I've been working on something serious." I continued, my voice quivering but getting firmer. "Say nothing, with great care, exactly as my grandmother instructed me." Lauren lost her smile. "A business opportunity like this would have been grasped by even Grandma Sam. Everything has transformed." Charles lent me an expression of patience. "I can see why you adore this spot. The data, however, do not mislead. And the stats are saying sell right now." Anxiety gripped me. The expressions on everyone's faces were familiar. They were the same expressions on my face when I was a child, when they patted me on the head, when they praised my sweetness, quietness, and sensiblency, and when they never once considered asking me how I was doing since then. Charles extended his palms out. "Now is the time, Sam, if you have a counter-proposal." I was hesitant. I wanted to yell for some reason, to dump all the papers I'd been hoarding for years onto the table and witness the tsunami of shock wash over them. However, I restrained myself. "At this time, no. I decided to swallow my anger and say calmly after taking a long breath, "Perhaps I do actually have an idea. I will, however, reveal it tomorrow." It was a laugh out loud for Brandon. "Very well, Sam. Excited to hear about your plan for the second-hand store." I quietly exited the room, my thoughts racing as the discussion came to a close. Quiet didn't imply helpless, and that was something they'd never grasped. And tomorrow, they would find out for sure who they had been ignoring for so long. Except for the slight ticking of the grandfather clock outside my chamber, the Carter estate was dead quiet that late that night. With my laptop open and the screen's cool blue light bathing my face, I sat at the old desk next to the window. A hidden, tranquil empire gazed back at me from rows and rows of spreadsheets, their figures neat and tidy. For more than 10 years, I had concealed this reality from my family. That was the year it began after Grandma Margaret had died away. When compared to my cousins, the amount I inherited is rather small. Condos and vehicles were their spending priorities. Not me. I put it to better use as seed money instead. I started off modestly by purchasing a duplex in a somewhat unassuming neighborhood on the outskirts of Fishtown. I was painting stairwells and learning how to bargain with contractors while Brandon and Lauren were popping champagne at rooftop bars. I got almost twice as much money out of the sale of the duplex 2 years after I bought it. With the use of an LLC, I was able to keep my identity hidden from the public eye while I invested those proceeds in 2 other homes. I grew steadily during the following decade. Compact complexes of dwelling units, business establishments in areas where no one else was looking, at least not at the moment. With caution and diversification, I was able to build successful investing relationships with local developers who were willing to work behind the scenes to fund improvements in return for a cut of the future profits. Just the facts, please. A lack of signatures from members of the family. There was also absolutely no cause for the Carters to have any suspicions. I had accumulated 14 residential buildings and 4 business properties spread around over Philadelphia by the time I was 33. On the other hand, 2 years ago, I made a really big change. I found out that Carter Realty has an available controlling stake of 30%. Outside of the public eye. Sure, I can help you with that. By means of a private equity firm selling off its ownership interest. Charles failed to see the warning signals since he was preoccupied with pursuing prominent development ventures. Still, I hadn't. I bought the shares in chunks over the course of 18 months via a trust called Margaret's Legacy Trust. Every single transaction is too little to set off any kind of alarm. All of them were protected by various legal frameworks. My attorney, Jacob Ellis, oversaw the whole process to make sure no trail could ever find its way back to me. The ability to conceal wealth was still there even in the era of the internet. Not if you were skilled at constructing paper fortifications that could ward off inquisitive gazes. And throughout the while that I was not included in reports or on lists of assets, my impact expanded. In silence. Patiently. I had learned the same thing from Grandma Margaret. Why is there irony? A high-rise known as Independence Tower was home to Brandon and Lauren's rental units. A structure that I owned outright as of last year. They were paying rent to one of my limited liability companies, LLCs, on a monthly basis. No ill will intended. But the reason is that it was just excellent for business. A mix of peace and anxiety washed over me as I glanced at the columns of numbers on the computer. Just because tomorrow it wouldn't be sufficient to hide. Tomorrow was the day to make my speech. As we assembled for the last session of the conference, the morning light poured through the huge windows of the Carter Estate Library. There was an air of anticipation in the room, as if a storm were about to erupt. Lauren sat up straight, her hands neatly groomed, clutching a folder of notes as Brandon fidgeted with his phone. Charles cleared his throat as he stood at the front. I need to get the mansion sale vote finalized and start preparing documents for Westbrook Developments before we wrap up. The helpers in the rear started handing out thick folders as he signaled for them. There's a deal worth $55 million being discussed, Charles announced. It's about the inheritance of wealth from this family. Brandon bent over. I am prepared to sign. A potential investment on the seashore has already been identified. Just a little nod from Lauren. Everything is the same over here. This spot is stunning, but we have the potential to create something truly unforgettable. A small grin spread across Charles's face. That is great. After that, in the absence of objections, up I got. Silence descended upon the chamber. Then Charles looked at me quizzically and said, "Samantha, do you have anything to say?" I whispered a confident yes back. "I would like to reveal to you all my true identity." Brandon chuckled gently. Sam, I don't think this is the right moment. The timing couldn't be better. On the table, I placed a smooth leather folder. Why? Because for a long time, everyone thought I was too shy to say anything meaningful. Observant Lauren cocked her head to the side. Hey, Sam, what's going on here? Upon opening the folder, I extracted a small stack of documents that had been notarized and stamped. This is the record of who owns what in Margaret's legacy trust. Additionally, a log of the most recent deals. As a result, Charles tensed up. Which deals? I cast my eyes over every face seated at the table. 14 months ago, I utilized the trust to purchase a 30% interest in Carter Realty. A sound that resembled a scoff and a cough was produced by Brandon. It's just not feasible. No, it's not, I responded boldly. A private equity company was the owner of the stock. In other words, they desired to retreat. My desire was to be admitted. The amount spent was so little that it did not show up on any of the reports, at least until the totals were calculated. Almost to herself, Lauren muttered. However, I failed to see why you would engage in such covert behavior. I spoke slowly, allowing my words to register because I was aware that Charles would attempt to obstruct anyone he found out was covertly purchasing influence. And on occasion, being silent can be a powerful thing. Charles's clenched jaw widened as he gazed at me. There must be more than 30% to halt this sale, even if this is accurate. I raised a different piece of paper. That is why at 9 a.m, a corporation that owns 7% of Carter Realty Jacob Ellis Development was bought by Margaret's Legacy Trust. All that amounts to 37%, sufficient to obstruct any choice. A hesitant laugh escaped Brandon. Hold on a second. Are you advocating that you've been frantically purchasing shares in the family business? I managed to say yes in a composed manner, and I've also been covertly buying and selling properties all over Philadelphia. A new page turned over in my hands. The Independence Tower is one such example. You mean the downtown high-rise, the ownership is with me. Lauren lost her expression as she gazed at me. That is my home. My response was, I know. I have an LLC that gets your rent payments. After seeing it, Brandon was in awe. So are you our landlord? I think so. Furthermore, you are first-rate renters. As they glanced from their seats to me and the papers, everyone in the room seemed to be shifting. Charles rallied his troops. So, the Carter estate is being discussed. It's touching for you. This makes sense to me. A $55 million agreement cannot be derailed due to sentimental reasons. My eyes locked with his. Nostalgia has nothing to do with this. The topic is legacy. Rather of relying solely on financial gains, Grandma Margaret deliberately amassed this family's fortune. It serves no use to sell this house for condominiums. We are being erased. Arms crossed, Brandon stood. So you're going to make that decision all by yourself without consulting anyone else? No, I said gently. I'm not working on this decision alone. Also, I will not stand by and let you make a decision by yourself. Charles stared at me, his expression one of profound silence. In the end, he asked, So, what are your thoughts, Samantha? I took a deep breath. That the house remains. The Margaret Carter Foundation, which promotes financial literacy and offers assistance to those in need, will call it home, where Grandma's values may be honored. The place was dead silent. Plus, I went the entire weekend without an interruption. After I made my suggestion, there was a long period of quiet during which I could make out the faint ticking of the antique clock in the corner. Crossing his arms across his chest, Charles emitted a slow exhalation. So you've been quietly navigating the situation the whole time. Stock purchases, taking part in market activities. My gaze locked with his unflinchingly. This family's future is something I've been putting money into. So what if you were blind to it? As he moved around in his chair, Brandon ran his fingers over his hair. Sam, this is just crazy. Are you saying that for the past 2 years you have been my landlord? I never heard you say a word. I softly shrugged. It was for work. As renters, you were ideal. Making it personal didn't make any sense to me. Lauren drew closer, her face contorted into a mixture of wonder and shame. Sam, why were you so uncooperative, we needed to know. Like a suffering cousin, we've been treating you poorly. Because you never inquired, I whispered. Plus, I required unfettered constructability in order to complete my work. In a nervous tone, Aunt Valerie cleared her throat. You always appeared so composed, and now I realize why. After all this time, your modesty was all we could see." Charles seemed to be battling a headache as he rubbed his temples. "Because of you, the sale of the mansion is now stalled. I'm keeping it," I clarified, "for a purpose beyond the development of yet another condominium." As he shook his head, Brandon emitted a low-volume laugh. "Dude, I'm not sure if I'm angry or impressed." Lauren smiled timidly at me. "I mean, it's pretty amazing, I suppose. You accomplished this with such ease." I surveyed my surroundings. It was never my intention to cause anyone shame. All I wanted was for Grandma's legacy to have some substance, and just to show that power isn't always shouted from the rooftops. The edges of Charles's sternness softened somewhat when our eyes met. "Maybe? Samantha, we didn't give you enough credit." With a nod, I concurred. "It's okay with me, recognizing the value of underestimation." I felt like I belonged there finally on my own terms after all those years. Even though the meeting was supposed to finish that night, Charles stayed at the library until past the designated departure time. As he fretted nervously on the table, he gazed to the vacant seats. He proceeded to discreetly dial a number. "Charles Carter it is. Mark, please analyze Margaret's legacy trust thoroughly, including anything having to do with Samantha Carter. The number of documentation levels is irrelevant to me. Determine my leverage." The other party's voice was wary. "That might be delicate, sir." The warmth in Charles's voice faded. "I am not requesting that you violate any laws. You have my request locate some data. That type that encourages individuals to work together." At the same time, Jacob Ellis had left a message on my upstairs room phone. "A hole is being dug. Prepare yourself." With clenched jaw, I gazed at the television. Charles would soon find out that my legal framework was prepared for storms like this one, in case he felt he could force me to surrender my part. In addition, if he made an effort to publicly coerce me into doing something, if someone asked me to reveal the Carter family's true business practices, I would be prepared to do it. Reporters and camera teams swarmed the Carter estate a week later under the cool fall sky. As I approached the stage, a light wind fluttered through the papers I had. I started by making it quite obvious that I was going to announce the establishment of the Margaret Carter Foundation today. A sound of astonishment resounded among the assembled spectators. Financial education and the encouragement of local businesses, particularly in underserved areas, will be the focus of this foundation. I took a moment to allow the words to register. This mansion, the Carter Estate, will serve as its administrative center. Villas, not apartments. No, not exclusive clubs. However, an area where both education and opportunity may flourish. Following the news conference, Charles came up to me with great caution. "Perhaps the family might help out in some manner, Samantha." I grinned at him with a little courteous grin. "To volunteer, you are more than welcome. Seats on the board are unavailable, no preferential treatment, simply honest labor." Brandon looked at me funny-faced. "Could you spare some time, such as, say, distributing flyers?" With a nod, I concurred. "Or instructing financial management courses, or assisting local companies with strategic planning." Lauren shook her head and quietly laughed. "Well, I suppose there's an initial occasion for everything." Plus, there was an air of calm confidence as I surveyed the estate grounds. Why? Because this property, together with our family's fortune, would finally represent something more than ourselves. As the sun dipped below the horizon that night, I found myself standing alone in the rose garden, surrounded by the delicate aroma of fading blossoms and crisp fall foliage. Grandma Margaret sprang to mind when I beheld the house gently lit up by the lights. Oh, those serene teachings. There was no need for a claim for genuine power, she murmured all those evenings. I had always put my faith in her. However, I couldn't help but wonder whether she was mistaken for a long time. Perhaps things would be different if everyone just paid attention to the most vocal person. My knowledge has expanded since then. Real wealth goes beyond mere numerical value. That's liberty. It's the power to craft your own narrative while also assisting others in doing the same. Also, you can't buy respect the meaningful kind with a vehicle or an apartment. True courage comes from standing up for what you believe in. If you're here today and have ever felt unimportant, disregarded, or neglected, then keep this in mind. Silent doesn't imply unnoticeable. Being patient is not a sign of being weak. Who knows, the one everyone is skeptical about might be the one with the key to their destiny. Feeling the refreshing wind rustle the flowers made me grin. I stopped trying to hide. And I experienced total liberation for the very first time. Have you ever taken someone by surprise, even if they assumed they knew your backstory? Please share yours with me.